All right, I have with me today Chris Steele. He is the Senior Director for Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning at IQVIA. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome to yourself.
Thanks. Today we're going to talk in a broad sense about how AI can be used to answer specific questions, but also how to wrangle and manage multiple AI initiatives across an organization. And of course, because I have this expert with me, we're going to talk about ChatGPT. Because that's everybody wants to know whatever they can find out. So let's start with this. So for context, describe for the folks who don't know what IQVIA is, what your business is, who your customers are in the sense of broadly.
Sure. So IQVIA is the result of the merger between IMS Health and Quintiles. So for those of you in the healthcare industry, you probably recognize Quintiles' name as one of the leaders in clinical trials. On the other hand, IMS Health was one of the leaders in healthcare data and analytics. So combined, we really supply the pharma industry with clinical trials and all of the analysis of data around that. So we really categorize ourselves as molecule to market. Once a pharma is ready to bring a drug to the clinical trial process, we'll help, get them set up, do site selection, really take them through the whole trial process. Once it's been through, then we'll help market it. So looking at price points in different countries and competitors and all of those things, we do a really wide range of analytics.
Yeah, so you have a pretty broad view, as you say, from molecule to market of the entire landscape of the pharmaceutical industry, at least, and maybe the healthcare industry entirely.
Right.
So, what was your task when you came on board?
So I was brought on back in late 2017 by our CTO to really help wrangle all of our AI efforts around the organization and to begin to drive AI and machine learning into all of our products. So that is the goal, really, to AI enable everything we do in terms of automation, better analytics, faster, cheaper, all of that. And if you look at IQVIA, we're a very siloed organization. We have many different groups. And what we discovered was there's actually a ton of different groups that were working on various AI-related projects, but they hadn't been communicating. So one of my big tasks was to put together a virtual team and pull together all the different leaders across the organization and get them talking about what they're doing with AI ML. And so, through that process, we've helped to deduplicate a lot of the efforts that were going on. We've helped standardize on our internal AI ML platforms, and really, most importantly, is help unifying the messaging that we're giving our clients. One of the things that was readily apparent when I first joined was that we're one of the most, technologically advanced companies out there, and yet nobody's even heard of what we've been doing with AI and ML. So that's been a big challenge as well.
Yeah, so you've been doing this for a while. I'm going to say that when I started this podcast a year ago, and it's just based on my curiosity about how AI is being used and looking at posts on LinkedIn, my impression was that a lot of companies had small AI initiatives. In fact, I think it was one of my first guests, Seb McLaughlin, and he was talking about companies weren't doing enough in the sense of they would do these small pilot projects, but they never went anywhere. And now, I think everybody certainly at least have had their eyes open if the actual state of things was farther along than you would have thought a year ago. Now everybody goes, oh my gosh, AI, we're all talking about it every day. And clearly you're using it. You're not testing anymore. You're in it, right?
We are in it. We're delivering solutions. We've got 7 large internal platforms. We've got a data lake that back in 2018 anyway, we we were pulling in more transactions than Google, believe it or not. So we've got, somewhere, between 30 and 40 petabytes of data under governance. So, yeah, we've got huge amounts of data. We've been using AI and ML, at all stages of the data pipeline. So if you think of our, 15,000 plus different providers, bringing in, all of this data, just mapping that into a structured format requires a large AI model to help us out. We use that for our mappers to be able to, build those ETL pipelines. We we've got I can't even well over 200 different projects that are, either in production or in flight, with, very sophisticated models. We've tended to weed out. We don't even really track just the regular machine learning models anymore. It's really more of the complex deep learning models.
All right. So I'm going to ask you about the range of questions that you're answering with AI, but I have to back up for a second. How many zeros go on to a terabyte to get a petabyte? Is that the next order of 1,000, or is it even beyond that?
It's the next order of 1,000. So it's
Okay.
basically, yeah, 1,000.
It's 1,000 terabytes.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. All right. So tell us about just a sense of the range of questions you are trying to answer for your customers with AI.
Again, it really varies. We do everything. If I think back to sort of the early stages within the cycle, site selection, right? So finding out you want to start a trial process. What are the best sites, given your drug, given um, all the demographics of the various areas, past performance, all of those things. So, doing site selection, building cohorts, huge, many models around that. And then moving into commercial, looking at providing analyses around what is the proper price point for this particular drug in this market, given the current competitors and vendor landscape. Uh, what are we also look at what are all the different drug sales across all of the different providers out there. So you think of like the CVS's, the Walgreens of the world, not just the U.S. but of the world. We help track and estimate, what the sales are on a weekly basis, so that pharma can use that to, to help with their reps, gauge performance, reimbursements, those type of things.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. I'm always learning a little bit more about the healthcare system. Pricing, of course, is interesting. And then, even the demographics of site selection. If you're going to do a test, a clinical trial, the first challenge is finding the people who need what you think you're going to be testing, and having data around those populations and centers that are effective at doing the test, because those are two separate things.
Right.
Yeah, very important. All right, so talk about, I guess this is a half-formed question. So how is it different than some advanced analytics to say, we know there are a bunch of, that this demographic is concentrated, or there are concentrations of this demographic in a certain area, and more in a predictive answer? And like I said, this is half formed based on my enough knowledge to be dangerous sort of status.
Right. So, if you think about traditional, more statistical analysis, right, when you're taking these large amounts of data, so looking at all these different features that go into that selection, in order to do the statistical analysis, it requires a lot of understanding between the relationships of those pieces of data, right? That requires domain experts with experience and knowledge, versus a deep learning model, for instance, which can go in and learn what the relationships are. It makes it faster to be able to. It's faster to build that model than to do the analysis in the traditional ways. And what we found is often it's just more precise, it's more efficient, it's just more time, time to market wise, it's a lot faster. So, which also brings up a good point, because there have been cases where we found where, a lot of that extra precision wasn't necessary and it wasn't cost effective. So we would fall back to more traditional means, just because it does cost a lot to train these large models, and it takes some time. So it's a balance, and the great part is we've got over 6,000 data scientists, and they are best of breed, and this has been nothing but a helpful tool for them.
Wow. Okay. So let's go into some specific examples. For example, and I think this came up a little bit. I did a podcast a few weeks ago with Judge Schneider from Nashville Biosciences, but you have data on people with diagnostic codes, for example, that kind of follow them through their journey, but what they're originally coded as may not be, it turns out, the exact right thing. And so there's some hands-on expertise that's required there. But let's talk about the challenge of identifying people with rare diseases. I mean, those are the ones that diagnosis is difficult to begin with. But what are the other factors that make that a challenge?
Well, most of the rare disease, well, I don't want to say most, a lot of rare diseases in patients go undiagnosed. So we struggle with how do you determine the population that actually has a disease, but it's been undiagnosed. One of our struggles with rare diseases is generally we don't have a lot of data to feed these large models. The data sets are unbalanced, right? You have a large normal population, but a very small positive population, just because, it is a rare disease by definition. So what we did, one of our data scientists went out and built a synthetic data generator to generate that positive population. And then we were able to use that to train the model, which went in and identified a population of people that we believed had that rare disease that had gone undiagnosed. So a lot of really interesting work there.
So yeah, that has also come up on a very early episode about generating. It slipped my mind now. Synthetic, yeah, data. So, and in that case, why do you need synthetic data when you already have a massive normal population? Why is that?
So in the case of rare diseases, you have a massive normal population, but you have a small positive population. In order for the model to be most efficient, you need to balance out those two data sets, the normal with the positive. So we needed to increase the size of the positive population. And that's where the synthetic data came in. We were able to take and generate a much larger synthetic data set of that positive population that we could then combine with the normal population to feed into the predictive model.
Okay, so yeah, I misheard it the first time. I was thinking about it wrong. Naturally, you want to balance them out, so you're making the positive thing. But how do you know? So my next question is, how do you know what that data of a positive thing looks like when you're still trying to figure out what an actual patient with that rare disease looks like?
So yeah, that's an interesting question. Would require a very long answer. But the synthetic data model, right, is a generative model. So it takes that smaller subset of positive people, that tested positively that we know have the disease, right? And it looks at all those characteristics and it understands relationships, and then it's able to generate a larger population that shares those characteristics. And I can't go into all the math and stuff, but we can go back and statistically look and prove and actually see the empirical results of the predictive model to understand that yes, it's actually generating, what looks like what replicates that positive population.
All right. So you have enough data to have the model sort of know what those characteristics are, and then you're expanding that out to balance it against a normal population, and then that is used in some way to be able to find the people that we're not sure about based on the fact that there are enough in the synthetic population. It somehow learns a little bit more and gets better at finding the undefined people with that rare
Right.
condition.
You use that generative model for the synthetic data, and then you use that to create the data sets that you feed into your predictive model that's going to predict whether or not somebody has that rare disease based on all those all their feature set.
Got it. Okay. So how do you measure the accuracy or the impact of that? How well does it identify those people with incorrect or uncertain diagnoses?
So obviously you have to do extensive testing. So just like with any type of data science project, you reserve a test and validation sets. So those are sets that aren't touched, that we know, here are the individuals we know that have that disease. And then we'll go and run them through the model along with the cohort that doesn't have the disease. And then we can just get a simple mathematical estimate of precision and accuracy.
I got it. Okay. Yeah, so you're just testing against known data sets that weren't used in the development of the model.
Correct.
All right, so ChatGPT, everybody's probably the word of the year at the end of 2023. What do we need to know about that? I mean, it's another sort of predictive model. Everybody's getting their hands on it, but maybe not everybody is aware of what it can do, what it should do, and what it probably shouldn't be used for.
Yeah. I think everybody is in the investigative stage right now. We certainly are. So a lot of different things to think about. On one hand, we're looking hard at where can we use this. This is a new capability. It's a new technology, and we think it's going to open up a lot of business cases for us. We think there's going to be a number of different benefits that we can derive from this. At the same time, we're also really just starting to learn about a lot of the security and privacy concerns. So, as I've been discussing earlier, one of the issues that a lot of people I don't think are aware of is that in the open version that you probably used out there from OpenAI, those your prompts, your questions that you're asking it are fed into the model, and that model retains that information. So somebody can come along and they could ask it a question about what people have asked it, and your question itself, that text could show up in their answer. So you have this real issue around trying to understand, what data am I giving it by asking questions and setting up the context, and what of that data can and will be shared with other users. That becomes a real big concern when you start thinking of some of the use cases where people are actually feeding it data. So if you're unaware that that data could be shared and you're giving it a large amount of data to maybe to help help it derive a program for you, some code, or maybe just to do some simple analysis. Um, that's great, but that data then might actually show up in raw form in somebody else's answer. So how do we protect against that? As a business, when we're moving forward and we're looking at some of these other providers, one of the things that we want to understand are one, what are you, the provider, what are you recording in terms of the prompts? So we don't want any of our questions being recorded and used, by these cloud providers. Two, how is that data shared among the users? In other words, we're going to require our own isolated instance. Do we require, more than one instance based on, level of data security? Do we have groups and say an R&D that are, going to be providing, some raw data that we don't want groups in marketing and communication and finance to see? So we're in the midst of battling through that. I think initial steps are really limiting access. So the first step a lot of companies I think are going to take is to create proxies and limit access and require people to provide a reason why they need to use this, and then support that through a business case, be able to justify the cost, because that's another big area. The cost can really grow. I don't know if you signed up for the actual version from OpenAI, but the number of tokens you get for that monthly fee isn't that great, and you can quickly go beyond. Same with the cloud providers. It's not a cheap model to use. So you want to really be careful about who's using it and for what purpose. And then also ensure that you're training the people that are going to use it. They have to understand data privacy, data leakage, and all these areas that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you and I, before we started recording, we're talking about the other cautions around being a confident liar, and I asked it for some papers and references, and I looked at every one of those references, which every one of them looked beautifully legitimate. And I tried to search for that exact reference on the web. No, not one of them existed. And then also some other just what would appear to be confident knowledge that I knew was wrong. The one thing you mentioned there is the expense. I only have the free version, but I can imagine why it gets expensive. Can you explain to me? I mean, when I get a Google search back in a fraction of a second, I'm thinking, it's indexed all this and it can quickly find it. But how does a system, and I'm guessing this is some part of the expense, as soon as I finish or hit send on my prompt, and I'm guessing it's reading ahead, I don't know, it starts spitting out words that make sense. And I'm going, how does it do that so fast? It's not because it's compiling sensible language, not just pulling items off the shelf that it's indexed already.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So you really have to understand the difference between model types and like with your Google search or your Bing search. These engines, they go out and they use MapReduce to put together common words, phrases, search terms, and so the results are really already calculated. It's really, that fast response is basically a lookup. Versus when you're using GPT-3, GPT-4, any large language model like that, it's a generative algorithm. It's taking your question and it's generating text, and that text is all tokenized. So as it's generating it, it's generating the next part. And due to the size of the model itself, et cetera, what we think of as inferencing, answering your question is actually a very compute heavy process. It is
Yeah.
putting those words together as it goes. So in the free version, like if you ask it to write you a short story or something, you see that you're getting those back. Those, if you think of those words and the groups of words as tokens, it's really looking at each of those and generating the next one based on what it's generated before. So it's not a lookup; it's generating as it goes.
Right, which I presume that's what requires massive amounts of computing power, which just stuns me that for free I can get access to. Someone's paying for it to generate those words for all of us. But anyway, the speed of computation boggles my mind.
Yeah, it is, and that's why it's really restricted to some of the tech behemoths at the moment, because they're really the only ones that can afford to train these models in the first place. So if you think of the cost of inferring, generating your responses, think of the amount of compute time that it took to be able to train these models. It's hundreds of millions of dollars.
For sure. All right, let's circle back to the original challenge. You come on board, and there are multiple AI projects going on in different parts of the company. I think this was an interesting story. Like, how did you get people to raise their hand and say, hey, I've got a project, when I think everybody will understand that people can be protective of their projects because they feel like it might be taken away from them. Right?
That was that's a great question. And the secret I learned early on was competition. So I went out and I asked people to share all about their projects, and I didn't get a lot of responses. I got some guarded answers, etc. So what I did was I took all those, I put them together in a shared spreadsheet, and then in the virtual team that I've mentioned, where we have all these leaders from across those, I plopped up the spreadsheet and I said, "Here's what people are doing, and look, this team is doing this, and this team is doing that. These guys are the leaders." And suddenly, right after that, as you can imagine, everybody starts dumping all of their projects on me. A lot of them we had to sort of weed out because they actually weren't really AI, ML related. But yeah, turn it into a competition, and then people are willing to share a lot more.
If you tell a scientist that someone else has a better idea, you're going to get everything they know. That's the punchline right there, man. Chris Steele, this has been a treat to talk to you. I've learned a ton about AI and how it's used in, across healthcare and in the pharma industry. Thank you so much for your time.
Chris, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.